Since Rusty passed away, Linda had become a shadow of herself. She now lived quietly in the small house tucked at the edge of town, once filled with the familiar sounds that shaped her days, the soft tapping of paws on wooden floors each morning, the steady breathing from a corner armchair, and the joyful bark when the door opened after a long day. Now, those sounds lived only in memory, and touching them felt like pressing on a bruise. Rusty, the gentle golden-haired dog who had been by her side through her loneliest years, her happiest days, and her deepest heartbreaks, now existed only in the form of a frayed collar hanging on a nail by the fireplace, a silent pause in the music of her life. Linda used to be outgoing, full of energy, and had an unshakable passion for animals. She had once volunteered at a rescue shelter, taken in stray cats, and nursed an injured roadside dog back to health with her own hands. But on the day she cradled Rusty in her arms and whispered her final goodbye as his heart gave out on an old quilt, something inside her simply went dark. She closed herself off, no longer brave enough to open her heart again. Each morning she would brew coffee only to let it go cold, sit for hours on the porch, staring into the shifting sunlight, and feel nothing. Her eyes looked tired, and the smile that used to bloom so easily, just at the sight of a squirrel darting past the fence, had vanished without a trace. Her sister Nina had seen it all in silence, leaving only gentle notes behind. "I made your favorite scones today," or "The house still looks lovely, just needs you to come back." Nina was the only one who kept knocking on the silent world Linda had locked herself inside. And one afternoon, bathed in the golden hush of autumn light, the two sisters sat together as Nina poured tea into a mug with tiny paw prints, an old birthday gift from Linda, and gently rested her hand on her sister's shoulder. "I'm not asking you to forget Rusty," she said softly, "and I know you're not ready to love again. But somewhere out there might be a little soul, just as lonely, just as lost, who's also lost their person. Maybe you could be the one to help them start over, and maybe they could be the one to help you come back to yourself." Linda said nothing. She just stared into the cup of tea, where small ripples shimmered like breath, and deep inside something stirred. Small, fragile, like the first note after a long silence. That night, Linda opened an old wooden box where she kept every keepsake of Rusty. A photo of them in a winter cabin, the yellow raincoat he never liked, and a worn birthday card from a little girl that read, in wobbly handwriting, "To the best dog in the world." The memories returned, not just painful, but tender. At that moment, Linda understood. She couldn't live in the past forever. The next morning, without a word to anyone, Linda brushed off her long coat, tied up her hair, and drove toward the gates of the old animal shelter. The faded sign "Animal Haven" appeared behind a row of fiery red maple trees. Her heart clenched, not out of fear, but because she knew she was finally facing what she had avoided for 2 years, the chance to love again. It was as if something quiet but resolute guided her steps, leading Linda to the weathered gates of Animal Haven, the shelter where she once poured her heart into saving abandoned lives. The wooden gate creaked softly as she pushed it open, a sound that wasn't loud, but sharp enough to awaken something old inside her. She had stood here before, more than once, since Rusty died. But each time she had only made it a few steps in before turning back, as though something unseen had anchored her heart. This time, she stepped fully inside, even as her heartbeat stumbled and her feet hesitated. The shelter smelled just as she remembered: disinfectant, damp fur, and something else hard to name. The scent of time left waiting. The walls were still lined with faded flyers of dogs needing homes, a few Polaroids of adoptions, each scribbled with "Found there forever." A knot tightened in Linda's chest. She thought of her first photo with Rusty, him sitting with his head tilted in her lap, eyes full of trust. Back then, she believed she had found her forever, too. But forever, it turned out, rarely lasted as long as we hoped. A young woman approached, hair tied up in curls, wearing a worn sweater with tiny paw prints. She smiled when she saw Linda. Not surprised, not curious, just like someone who recognized a soul finding its way home. "You came back," she said gently. Linda gave a small nod. No explanation was needed. They remembered her. The woman who once busied herself with baths and bandages, who worried over every frightened animal. But this time Linda wasn't here to help others. She had come to search for something to help herself. Following the familiar hallway, Linda walked deeper into the section known quietly among the staff as the Quiet Wing, the area for dogs who had waited the longest, the ones too tired to greet visitors, too worn out to hope. They didn't bark anymore, didn't whimper to be chosen. They simply waited. Kennel 19 stood at the very end, beneath a flickering fluorescent light. There was no sound, no movement, just a thin, still figure sitting like a statue. The dog's coat was a mess of tangled grays and browns, patchy and shedding in clumps, especially around the ears and spine. One eye had clouded over, but the other, sharp amber, looked straight through Linda. No begging, no fear. Just watching. Mel, the young volunteer, came to a stop behind her and exhaled softly. "That's Reggie. He's been here almost 8 months. No file, no chip, no one's asked about him. No one's chosen him. He doesn't act friendly, but he's never done anything wrong. He's just different." Linda didn't answer. She crouched down slowly, letting her eyes meet his. His breath was slow and heavy, neither excited nor nervous. And in that gaze, Linda saw something too familiar, the way she had looked at the world for the past 2 years, quiet, guarded, and waiting for someone patient enough to come close. As the light above flickered down on his neck, she noticed an old, worn leather collar. Attached was a thin, round brass tag, scuffed by time but still readable in the dim glow. "If you're reading this, I was loved once." The words pierced her, not with sharp pain, but a quiet cut that went deep. It wasn't just a message from a dog. It was the voice of a soul who had known love, who had been someone's once, and who was still waiting for someone to believe that love could return. Nothing moved between them, not a wag, not a growl, not a nuzzle, but in that silence, Linda felt more than any bark could ever say. Reggie just looked at her, still and steady, as if asking without words, "This time will someone be brave enough to stay?" Reggie's eyes never left Linda, not pleading, not desperate, not even indifferent, just the gaze of a creature who had grown used to silence and loss, watching a human with the faintest hope that maybe, just this once, someone might stay. That look, though wordless, struck something deep within her, not out of pity, but because in his eyes she saw herself. A soul once loved, then left behind in a cold world, unsure how to begin again. She sat there in the stillness of the worn hallway, the ceiling fan creaking above, distant barks echoing like faint memories. Reggie's breath came slow and steady through the bars, like time had paused around them. Linda lowered her head, fingers tightly clasped, the weight in her chest spreading to her shoulders, fragile enough that one wrong move might break her completely. The fear she felt wasn't about Reggie. It was about herself. She knew what was waiting if she took even one more step. Love. And what if she lost it again? A voice, soft, rough, familiar, broke through her spiraling thoughts like mist falling on the first morning of spring. Linda looked up and saw Maria, the older woman who had long overseen the difficult-to-adopt dogs. Her salt-and-pepper hair was tied back neatly, her face lined with years, her eyes tired but warm, the kind of kindness shaped by time, not sentiment. Maria sat beside her without a word at first, staring into Kennel 19, where Reggie remained still as stone, and let out a long sigh, full of meaning. "I've seen you," she said at last, still watching Reggie. "You've come before, and left. I know that feeling, wanting to do something but too afraid to start again. I lost a dog too many years ago. Haven't had one of my own since." She paused, her voice low. And then I met Reggie. Linda turned slightly, her eyes softening. Maria went on, her tone slower now, like telling a story about someone who'd once mattered. He came in on a stormy morning, soaked to the bone, his fur matted, shivering. The only thing he had was that little brass tag hanging from his neck. No chip, no background, no one ever came looking. And from that day to now, he's been the same. Never barking, never acting out, never approaching. I've seen people stop at Kennel 19, Maria continued. Some crouch down, ask his name, even try reaching through the bars. But they always walk away, because Reggie doesn't give them what they expect. He doesn't wag, doesn't lean in, doesn't lick their hands. He just watches, like he's waiting for someone who knows how to read silence. Linda asked, barely above a whisper. Has anyone ever taken him home? Maria nodded slowly. 3 times. The first was a family with 2 kids. They wanted a playful dog, one that would chase balls and roll around. Reggie just lay in the corner. He returned after a week. The second was a woman who lived alone like you, but I think she wasn't ready. She said it felt too heavy to live with a dog who gave nothing back. The last was a young couple. They believed love was enough, but they didn't have the patience. When Reggie didn't improve after 2 weeks, they gave up too. A bitter dryness crept up Linda's throat. She thought of her unmoving days, when her sister tried coaxing her out, when friends invited her for coffee, and all she could do was sit in the dark. She knew what that felt like. Grief has no schedule. No one has the right to demand healing on their terms, and not everyone dares to wait for a heart to open again. Maria stood, eyes still on Reggie. He's not an easy choice, Linda, but sometimes the hard choices are the ones we need the most. Linda didn't speak. She stood still a while longer, hand resting on the worn brass tag. The words engraved there. If you're reading this, I was loved once. Played over and over in her mind, a distant echo, a broken refrain that somehow never lost its meaning. She didn't know when her decision had formed. All she knew was that when Maria returned with the ring of keys and asked gently, "Are you sure?" Linda didn't hesitate. "I'm not sure," she replied, "but I won't walk away again." The car door closed behind Linda with a soft click, quiet enough to break a heart. For a fleeting moment, she asked herself if she was truly ready for what she had just begun. Reggie sat in the passenger seat, unmoving, not looking around, not reacting even as she gently fastened the seatbelt around him. His distant gaze seemed to pull all warmth from the air, leaving a silence so thick it hung like fog in the car. Linda glanced at him as the engine started, and they pulled away from the shelter, her hands resting lightly on the wheel, as if trying to steady her own heart, trying to convince herself that this was the right thing, that she could do this, that her heart had healed enough to carry another that had once been broken too. The drive home was wordless, one woman and one dog, sitting like 2 quiet shadows beside each other, each carrying a weight that had no name. Reggie didn't bark, didn't whimper, and didn't show interest in the world rushing past the windows. He just sat, rigid, eyes fixed forward, spine straight like a soldier bracing for the unknown, every movement a quiet defense. Linda spoke now and then, soft, aimless things meant to fill the air. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" Or, "The house is near a park, lots of trees." But all she received in response was a faint breath fogging up the window. When they finally pulled up to the small house nestled beside a street scattered with fallen maple leaves, Reggie still didn't move. Linda didn't rush. She opened the door on his side and waited patiently. And after what felt like the passing of a whole season, Reggie stepped down. Slowly, not reluctantly, not eagerly, but with the air of someone used to being moved too many times to care where they'd landed. He didn't sniff the doorway, didn't explore the new surroundings. He simply walked inside with the kind of resignation that says, "This is just another place, and I'm just passing through." Linda had prepared a cozy little spot in the living room, an emerald green cushion, a bowl of clean water, a dish of soft, plain food, and an old wool blanket that smelled faintly of lavender. It was the same corner Rusty used to sleep in when he grew older, a little island of peace. But when Reggie saw it, he gave it only a passing glance, then turned away and lay down on the wooden floor next to the sofa, facing the wall. Linda didn't approach. She simply stood there, watching quietly, feeling the waves of emotion build inside her. Tenderness, sorrow, uncertainty, and that old fear still echoing in her chest. Am I enough to make someone feel safe again? The afternoon passed like a slow-motion reel. Linda tried not to do anything that might startle him. She opened the windows to let sunlight stream in, giving Reggie space to choose where he wanted to be. She sat in her chair, reading, soft instrumental music playing in the background. Occasionally she called his name, gently, without expectation, just so he'd know she was there and that no one would ask anything of him before he was ready. But Reggie didn't respond. He didn't turn, didn't twitch. His ears drooped, his eyes avoided hers, and his entire body seemed buried beneath a wall of silence she couldn't yet touch. At dinner, Linda set out 2 plates, one for herself, one for Reggie. She carefully placed shredded boiled chicken mixed with soft rice into his bowl, but he didn't touch it. He glanced at it, then turned his face away, as if the scent stirred no memory of warmth, no echo of home, no trace of belonging. Linda didn't push him. When night fell, she picked up the bowl, placed it gently in the corner, and left it there. A quiet message. When you're ready, it will still be here. As she got ready for bed, Linda didn't close the bedroom door as she used to. She left it slightly ajar, letting a thin strip of hallway light fall across the floor, a small path between 2 worlds. She lay down, trying to lull herself to sleep, but Reggie's image stayed with her. This dog who said nothing, showed nothing, yet carried a story too long for words. Somewhere in the middle of the night, as soft rain began to tap on the roof like fingers brushing across a quiet memory, Linda stirred. Her eyes opened in the dimness, and then she heard it. Not loud, not persistent, just a breath, a sigh, so soft that it might have gone unnoticed by anyone not listening with their whole heart. It came from where Reggie lay. Not a whimper, not a tired exhale, but something that had been held inside for far too long, finally slipping out. It wasn't a sound of despair. It wasn't quite peace, either. It was simply the sound of a creature beginning to accept that, maybe, just maybe, this place won't be as bad as the last. Linda closed her eyes again. She said nothing, but in her heart she knew that one sigh was a beginning, and sometimes, between 2 souls that have both been broken, a single exhale is enough to start rewriting something entirely new. Linda sat at the edge of her bed for a long time, hands wrapped around a cup of tea that had long gone cold, her eyes trailing the thin ribbons of sunlight spilling slowly through the blinds and dripping like golden drops onto the cold wooden floor. Out in the living room, Reggie still lay in the same spot, his back turned to everything, a silent shadow in a house that had long grown used to silence. But Linda understood. This wasn't peace. It was the quiet of souls that had once been shattered, trying to survive another day by retreating into stillness. She set the cup down, stood up, not for any reason she could name, just a quiet pull from somewhere deep, and walked to the storage room at the end of the hallway. Since the day Rusty left, she hadn't once opened that door. The hinges groaned as it creaked open, and a soft cloud of dust rose into the morning air like memories being stirred awake. The small room, lit by the gentle light of early autumn, still held the scent of the years gone by. Old paper, folded fabric, and faintly, the smell of dog hair time hadn't yet erased. She knelt beside an oak chest tucked in the corner. The tiny lock had rusted, but it opened easily, as if it too understood that now was the right moment. Inside were the pieces of Rusty's life, not many, but enough to lift a whole period off the ground. On top was a photograph, now fading with age, taken one winter long ago. Linda, in a thick burgundy sweater, hair tousled by the snow, beside her Rusty, the golden dog with bright, shining eyes, leaping into the air to catch a ball mid-flight, snow exploding around them like confetti celebrating a new year. Just beneath the photo was that very tennis ball. The fuzzy covering had worn down to the rubber, its edges frayed, still bearing the distinct marks of teeth Linda could never mistake. She picked it up in both hands, cradling it like a moment solidified in form. Something that once symbolized the purest kind of joy shared between two beings who had meant the world to each other. Next came the tiny yellow raincoat, neatly folded inside a fabric pouch, something Linda had bought just because Rusty looked ridiculously cute in it. Every time she put it on him, he would prance a few steps with exaggerated front paws, then turn to look at her as if to say, "Okay, laugh it out now." Linda chuckled softly, her voice rough with old emotions. She still kept a few children's drawings, crumpled A4 pages with smeared crayon lines, pictures of Rusty and her standing under a rainbow. The words above written in wobbly, innocent handwriting, "The happiest dog in the world." They were just things, small, ordinary things, but together they held an entire universe from the days when her heart still remembered how to breathe through laughter. The memories flooded in like a slow-motion film. The family cabin on a snowy mountain, wooden steps buried in white, Linda and Rusty running through the yard like two kids. She remembered the sting of cold on her fingertips, the wind rustling through pine trees, and Rusty's breath puffing out in white clouds as he raised his head after catching the ball, tail wagging like a tiny banner of victory. That night they'd sat by the fire, wrapped in one blanket, Linda reading aloud by the glow of the flames. Rusty rested his head on her shoulder, and she placed her hand on his back, feeling each steady breath like a whispered promise. "I'm here, and I'll always be here." But of course, always never really means forever. As morning light streamed through the window and glistened in the tears still clinging to her lashes, Linda gently returned everything to the box, except the tennis ball. She stood, carrying that one small thing into the living room. Reggie was still lying there, not asleep, but not fully awake either, suspended in a fog of exhaustion and guardedness. Linda sat a respectful distance away, careful not to intrude, and softly rolled the ball forward. It traveled slowly across the wooden floor and stopped a few inches from Reggie. He turned his head, just a glance, then looked away again. That's okay, Linda thought. She didn't need an instant reaction. All she needed was a little listening, a little openness, and a lot of patience, because she understood, more than anyone, that some hearts that have been broken need time to believe that being loved again is even possible. And if Reggie carried a memory of being abandoned, she would sit with him, wait beside him, until the day he felt ready to open that memory, just like she had, earlier that morning. When the old tennis ball left Linda's hand and rolled gently across the wooden floor, so used to emptiness, its soft sound echoed in the stillness, like a quiet invitation between two souls who had forgotten how to trust. Linda expected nothing grand. Letting that ball go, the last item she'd kept from Rusty's memory box, wasn't a game nor a test for Reggie. It was simply a gesture, a soft knock on a door she knew had been shut for a long time. Reggie still lay curled up in the corner of the living room, eyes half open, as if drifting through a dream with no end. The slanting sunlight revealed patches of his thinning coat, bald spots not only on his body but mirrored deep in his spirit. The ball rolled to a stop just in front of him, nudging his paw, then rested there, waiting, like it too was asking permission. Linda held her breath, sitting a few feet away, her hands gently clasped, her eyes fixed on Reggie. Something inside her trembled, not from fear, but from hope, that fragile, risky feeling, the kind that breaks easily, yet somehow keeps people standing after everything else has fallen apart. Reggie didn't react at first. Time stretched long enough for Linda to think he might turn away and leave the ball behind, like everything else in his life. But then, unexpectedly, he lifted his head, slowly, carefully, like even the act of looking required deliberation. He didn't look at Linda. He looked at the ball, and that alone made her heart twist, because at that moment, without a word, she knew. He had seen it. He had recognized something, no matter how distant or faint. Then, gently, Reggie raised a paw and tapped the ball, sending it rolling back toward her. Just a little. Linda couldn't speak, not because she didn't know what to say, but because her throat tightened with an emotion so real it felt almost too heavy to hold. She looked at the ball now resting near her again, as if it carried a small, quiet message. I see you, and I know you're not like the others. She bent down, picked it up, her hand trembling slightly. She didn't look at Reggie, afraid that meeting his eyes might shatter the fragile moment. Instead, she simply rolled the ball back toward him, gently, tenderly, like letting a tiny piece of trust drift out into the world. This time it rolled a little closer to him. Reggie glanced at it, then at Linda, and in his gaze, still cautious, still sad, there was a sliver of light slipping through. He tapped the ball back again. Linda laughed. Not a loud, open laugh. It was a sound that rose from deep in her chest, from a place that had been asleep for a long time. A sound that stung her eyes and loosened something heavy in her shoulders. It was the first time she had laughed, truly laughed, in nearly 2 years. Not out of politeness, not forced, not guarded. Reggie was startled, his ears twitching, as if he'd never heard anything like it before. Thank you, Linda whispered, soft enough that only the darkness heard. She wasn't sure if Reggie understood, but his eyes, gentler now, a little less tense, were the most beautiful reply she'd ever received. That night, Linda didn't close her bedroom door like she used to. She left it open, not for any reason she could name, but simply because she wasn't afraid of hoping anymore. Before getting into bed, she looked out toward the living room one last time. Reggie was still there, but this time, his eyes followed her as she turned off the lights. Linda curled up under her blanket, listening for every sound. At first, there was only silence, the kind she had grown too used to. But then, from down the hallway, came the soft taps of claws on wooden floor. Slow, hesitant steps, until they stopped just outside her door. She opened her eyes and turned her head. Reggie was there, lying at the threshold, not stepping in but not leaving either. He curled into himself, resting his head on his front paws, eyes closed, his body still but close, closer than any night before, as if he was saying, through his quiet presence, I'm not ready to come in yet, but I'm ready to come closer. Linda didn't say anything. She just lay there, watching him through the dark. Moonlight spilled across the floor, casting 2 shadows side by side, one woman, one dog, like 2 breaths that had finally found each other. And she knew then. The distance between them, once a wall, had begun to shrink. Not through words, but through a tennis ball, a laugh, and a little bit of courage to believe that what was lost might still be found again. Since the night Reggie lay just outside her bedroom door, the distance between him and Linda seemed to shrink, not through any grand gestures, but through a growing ease in the way they occupied the same space. Breakfasts no longer felt like silent standoffs between patience and detachment. Reggie had started to nudge his nose into his food bowl before retreating to his spot. An acknowledgement, subtle but real. Sometimes he'd even eat a few bites. Not eagerly, but no longer completely indifferent. Linda didn't say a word. She simply smiled because for hearts that have been abandoned, even the smallest progress feels like a miracle. That morning, for the first time, she picked up the new leash and collar. Earthy brown, simple, soft. She had hesitated to use them, afraid they might startle Reggie or bring back something he wasn't ready to face. But when Linda sat down on the rug, collar resting gently in her hands, Reggie walked over. Not quickly, not hesitantly. He just stepped forward and lowered his head, like he understood the signal or had known it long ago. The moment made Linda pause. Not every dog reacts like that to a leash. There was something too precise, too calm, too practiced, like a memory rising from muscle rather than mind. She opened the door, and they stepped outside. Morning light spilled across the pavement like melted honey. The quiet little street where Linda lived wasn't busy, but it was lively enough to be a test. For a dog who'd spent months in a shelter, who hadn't known the world in some time. But Reggie? He didn't pull. He didn't sniff at every scent, didn't bark at strangers, and didn't dart after passing bikes. He walked on her left side, step for step, never tugging once, as if an invisible thread connected them long before the leash ever did. At the first intersection, Linda reached to gently signal him to stop. But before she could, Reggie had already paused. He didn't look at her. He stared straight ahead at the traffic light, red, and stood still, like a soldier awaiting orders. When the light turned green, Reggie lifted his head and glanced at her. He didn't move until she did. The first time she thought it might be a fluke. But after it happened 3 more times at different crosswalks, she began to realize this wasn't instinct. It was training. And not just walk nicely on a leash training. Reggie showed an almost uncanny awareness of his surroundings. When a toddler tripped and fell ahead of them, crying on the sidewalk, Reggie froze immediately. Not lunging, not flinching. He simply watched. Calm, composed. His gaze was steady, quiet, like a being who had faced chaos before and learned to stay grounded in it. When they passed a construction site and a sudden drill shrieked through the air, Linda flinched. Reggie didn't. He turned his head slightly toward her, ears perked for a second, then walked on. No panic, no pulling, no attempt to flee. Complete control. Linda said nothing at the time, but a clear unease stirred inside her. She began replaying every moment since Reggie had come home. The way he never broke anything, never jumped on the couch, never stole food, never rummaged through the trash, never barked out of turn, never acted like a normal dog. Even the way he waited at thresholds, or chose to lie exactly on the border between light and shadow, it all made her feel like Reggie wasn't just another stray. They stopped to rest at the small park at the end of the street, where the breeze danced through the grass and the sparrows chirped beneath an old oak tree. Linda sat on a weathered bench and exhaled slowly. Reggie didn't run off, didn't dig, didn't chase the birds. He simply lay beside her, resting his head on his front paws, squinting into the soft sunlight. Linda reached out and placed her hand gently on his back, for the first time during their walk. He didn't shrink away, didn't lean in. He just stayed still, but even his stillness carried layers. A kind of conditional submission, a deeply conditioned alertness, and a sorrow etched too deep to be smoothed over with a few days of affection. "What were you, Reggie?" Linda asked softly, her eyes drifting across the dark coat that had started to grow fuller with each day of care. "Who taught you to walk like a protector? And then left you like you were no one at all?" Reggie, of course, didn't answer. But at that moment, a breeze passed through, scented with pine and damp grass from last night's rain, and Linda saw his eyes open, looking into the distance. Not blankly this time, not aimless, but with the faintest flicker of recognition, like a door creaking open to a memory she hadn't yet earned the right to enter. At that moment, Linda understood. To truly connect with Reggie, she couldn't just see who he was now. She would have to learn who he had been, what shaped this dog into someone so exact, so composed, and yet so quietly abandoned without a trace. Sitting on an old wooden bench beneath the shade of a sprawling oak, Linda gently ran her fingers down Reggie's back, feeling the faint warmth that rose from his body. Not the easy closeness of familiarity, but no longer the distant chill of those first days. Morning sunlight filtered through the leaves, forming golden patches that danced across the grass. And for a moment, she forgot everything. The doubts, the questions, the pieces of Reggie's past she still hadn't pieced together. But then a small, urgent sob pulled her back to the present. Sharp, broken, the kind of sound that only a child makes when something feels too big for their little world. She turned her head and saw a girl, no older than 5 or 6, standing frozen near the paved path on the other side of the park. Her lavender dress, speckled with tiny stars, fluttered in the breeze. Her eyes were red and glossy, small hands clutching at the hem of her skirt. A large vanilla ice cream lay collapsed on the grass, melting under the sun, a messy white smear bleeding into the green. The child was trying not to cry, but her shoulders trembled in waves, like little tides struggling against a shore. Linda was about to stand up and approach her when Reggie, who had been lying quietly by her feet, head resting on his paws, suddenly rose. He didn't look to Linda for permission. He didn't wait for instruction. He simply stood and walked slowly toward the girl, not cautiously, but with a gentleness that stopped Linda in her tracks. She considered calling him back, unsure how a large dog might affect an already upset child. But she didn't, because Reggie didn't walk directly toward her. He curved his path, approaching from the side, careful not to intimidate. He stopped at just the right distance, close enough to be noticed, far enough not to overwhelm. The little girl lifted her eyes, tears still clinging to her lashes, and stared at Reggie with a messy, uncertain expression. The park fell quiet. Only the distant call of a crow and the rustle of dry leaves filled the space between them. Reggie lowered his head, slowly, gently, and began to lick the spilled ice cream. Bit by bit, no rush, no fuss, almost as if it wasn't about cleaning up but sharing. A silent gesture. I see what you've lost. Let me carry a little of it with you. The girl watched, eyes wide. Her lips stayed pressed together, but the corners started to curve, and then, soft, short, almost like it startled itself, a tiny giggle escaped. Reggie didn't react. He gave one more slow lick, then raised his head and looked at her. Calm, steady. His ears drooped softly, waiting for her response. The girl took a step forward, tentative, but not fearful, and reached out to gently touch the top of his head. Instantly, Linda saw Reggie's tail wag. Just once, a quiet flick in the air, like a thank you whispered between friends. Ella? A woman's voice rang out, breathless, laced with worry. A woman in her 30s came rushing over from the playground, tote bag in hand, hair tied back. Are you okay? I told you to stay where I could see you! She scooped the girl into her arms, eyes scanning Linda, then Reggie, clearly trying to assess what had just happened. But before Linda could say a word, the girl tugged on her mother's sleeve, beaming. I'm okay, Mama. The dog cleaned up the ice cream. He made me not sad anymore. The woman looked at Reggie, now sitting still, head tilted like a boy waiting to be scolded for doing something kind. She let out a soft laugh, brushing hair from her daughter's face. That's unusual, she said, glancing at Linda. She's usually terrified of dogs, screams and hides behind me, but today... She looked back at Reggie. Today she sat and laughed like she'd just met an old friend. Linda smiled, her eyes glistening in the sunlight. She didn't need to explain. She knew Reggie wasn't the kind of dog who barked with joy or begged for affection. He had a different gift, one quieter, deeper. He saw sadness. He recognized it in silence, and he found ways to touch it with gestures so small they were almost invisible, unless you needed them more than anything. As the mother and daughter walked away, the little girl looked back and waved. Bye, nice dog. Reggie wagged his tail again, then returned to Linda, settling once more by her side as if nothing unusual had happened. Linda watched him, her hand instinctively reaching down to rest on the fur that was growing soft and warm again after days spent frozen by pain and mistrust. You're not just well-behaved, she whispered. You're a healer, and I think maybe you've done this more times than I'll ever know. That afternoon, as the sunlight faded into a softer hue and golden leaves began to layer the porch steps like a whispered reminder of time passing, Linda and Reggie returned home after a long but gently uplifting day. Reggie curled up on the rug near the window, his head resting on his front paws, eyes half closed as if still listening to the echoes of a child's laughter drifting back from the park. Linda brewed herself a cup of herbal tea and settled into the armchair across from him, her heart still glowing from the rare, delicate moment Reggie had gifted her, a reminder that beneath his silence was a heart that had once known how to live fully and love deeply, even if she didn't yet know how. On the small wooden table beside her chair, Reggie's collar tag still lay where she'd left it, a tiny, weathered piece of brass, the old leather strap still clinging to a trace of mud from their very first walk. She picked it up, the way she often did when she needed to feel Reggie's presence more than just in a glance. The inscription on the front had long become familiar. "If you're reading this, I was loved once." That simple line had pierced her heart the first time she read it, and it was the reason she hadn't turned away, like so many others before her. But this time, instead of setting the tag back down, she turned it gently in the soft glow of her desk lamp. The warm light grazed its scratched surface, casting faint shadows and highlighting lines she hadn't noticed before. She narrowed her eyes, tilted the tag in a few directions, and then, through a veil of scuffs, age, and rust, a faint string of characters emerged. Not sharp, but just clear enough to piece together. She sat up straighter. Her heart thudded. It was an address, specific and complete. A street number, a road name, and the name of a small town she vaguely remembered passing through once, out near the western edge of the suburbs. There was no name, no phone number, just a single hand-carved line. 124 Fern Hill Road, Westbridge. Linda stared at the tag in her palm, feeling as though she'd just opened a sealed door without meaning to. She repeated the address silently, trying to recall anything she might know about that place, but nothing surfaced. What was undeniable, however, was this. Reggie was not just another nameless rescue. Someone, somewhere, had engraved that line, by hand, not machine, and someone had once loved him enough to leave behind a trail, a message, a map leading back to where his story had begun. She looked over at Reggie, now fast asleep, his body curled slightly against the evening chill. She walked over, sat beside him on the floor, still clutching the tag in her hand. She didn't wake him. She just rested her hand gently on the soft fur behind his neck, where the collar had once left its mark. "You used to belong to someone, didn't you?" she whispered, her voice as soft as the wind slipping through the cracked window. "And maybe that past is still out there, waiting for you to come back." That night, Linda couldn't sleep. She pulled out a map, opened her laptop, and searched for 124 Fern Hill Road, Westbridge. It existed, a small house on the edge of town, surrounded by pine trees and dirt roads. She didn't know if anyone still lived there, or if anyone was waiting. But a strange feeling welled up inside her. Not curiosity, but responsibility. Not just for answers, but for Reggie. She didn't only want to uncover his past. She believed that unless the scattered pieces of his story were gathered and honored, Reggie might never fully step out of the shadows he'd been living in. As the soft light of her bedside lamp flickered against the wall, Linda looked down at the tag resting in her palm. It caught one last glint before she closed her eyes. It was no longer just a worn piece of metal. It was the first key, the one that might finally lead Reggie home. The next morning, with frost still clinging to the cold window panes and sunlight not yet filtering through the bare trees outside, Linda folded the small map and slipped it into her coat pocket. She packed light, for a journey she wasn't sure would bring answers or simply add weight to her heart. Reggie stood by the door, quietly watching her every move, his head tilted slightly, as if he already sensed this wasn't a typical day. It wasn't a walk to the park or a stroll through the neighborhood. It was something longer, deeper, something that might bring them closer to a truth, even he wasn't sure he wanted to face. But when Linda opened the car door and gently patted the passenger seat, Reggie climbed in without hesitation. His eyes were a little brighter than usual, but still quiet, as if he understood. This time, they weren't just going somewhere. They were going back to something. The road to Westbridge stretched more than 20 miles, winding through silent pine forests and dirt roads that curved around gentle hills, where the world seemed to slow down just enough for the wind to whisper across the grass. Linda didn't turn on the radio. She didn't need anything but the steady hum of the engine and the soft rhythm of Reggie's breath, each one reminding her he was still there, still willing to follow, even without knowing where the road might end. When the car finally turned onto the narrow path leading to 124 Fern Hill Road, it felt like entering a different world, a place time had chosen not to rush. Before them stood a small, weathered farmhouse, aged but serene. The wooden boards, silvered by sun and rain, still held firm in the breeze. Faded white fences stood crooked but proud, and beyond them, golden fields of grass stretched like a rumpled autumn blanket left untouched. Reggie didn't move, but his body tensed slightly. His ears perked, just barely, as if trying to catch a sound that lived somewhere deep in the past. Linda parked by the roadside, shut off the engine, and placed a hand gently on his collar. "We're just here to see," she said softly, not sure if she was talking to Reggie or herself. The gate to the farmhouse wasn't locked, just looped with an old rope, loose and welcoming. When Linda stepped out, Reggie followed. Not fast, not eager, but with the air of someone who'd passed through many doors before, only this time, the door led backward. They hadn't walked far when an old man appeared on the porch. He was tall, slightly stooped, with a mess of wind-blown white hair and a wooden cane that tapped steadily against the stone path. He wore a thick brown sweater, its shoulders worn thin, and his face was carved deep with wrinkles, lines etched by time, memory, and waiting. But what made Linda stop wasn't his appearance. It was his eyes. They were the eyes of someone who had waited so long, he'd forgotten he was still hoping. He stopped at the edge of the porch, gaze locked on Reggie. His legs froze, the cane tilted slightly, and for a moment it was as if time itself had blinked. His eyes widened, his brow twitched, his lips moved, forming words Linda couldn't hear. Reggie stood still. Then, slowly, almost imperceptibly, he raised his head, nose tilting toward the man. He didn't bark, didn't growl, but in his eyes something cracked open, something wordless, something old. "God, Tucker?" the man breathed, unsure whether he was calling a name or exhaling a memory. Linda turned to Reggie and saw him tilt his head, ears now drooping. His eyes were no longer wary, but full of something else. Confusion, recognition, disbelief, as though he too didn't quite know if this was real. The old man let go of the cane and took a trembling step down from the porch, his knees unsteady but his gaze unbroken. And then, Reggie, who had always held back, who never made the first move, walked forward, slowly, one step, then another, as if drawn by an invisible thread that had never truly snapped. When they were just a breath apart, Reggie stopped. He bowed his head, took in a long, steady inhale, and then gently rested his head against the man's leg. No one spoke. For a long moment, there was only the sound of wind passing through the fields, and the hush of grass brushing against itself, like breath caught in memory. The old man bent down, hand shaking as he touched Reggie's head, like reaching out to a ghost come home. "You were his," he whispered. "My son's. My boy, he's gone. But you're still here." At that moment, Linda understood. Reggie, or rather, Tucker, had once had a life, a person, a family, a memory that had waited all this time to be found again. When Reggie, or rather Tucker, rested his head against the old man's knee, as if searching for the forgotten scent of a life once his, Linda stood still, hand loosely gripping the leash, her heart clenched tight. In that moment, every word she had rehearsed, what she might say upon finding Reggie's former owner, suddenly felt unnecessary. No explanations were needed. The trembling in the old man's eyes said it all. An incomplete goodbye, a regret that had never stopped echoing, and above all, a love so deep it had once been too painful to face. "Tucker," the man whispered, this time as if saying the name to himself. And in response, Tucker let out a low, soft whine. Not loud, not urgent, but soaked in feeling, as though a thin sheet of ice that had covered his memory for years had finally begun to crack. The name, his real name, had reached something buried deep. The old man knelt, his hand shaking as it settled on Tucker's head. His eyes, clouded by time, now shimmered like they were holding back a storm that had waited too long to fall. He didn't look at Linda. He didn't ask who she was, or why she had brought Tucker back. None of it mattered more than this, that Tucker was alive, here in his hands, as if the last 4 years had never passed. He was my son's, the man finally said, voice hoarse, like a fire burning low in his chest. My son was a Marine. When he came back from his final training tour, he brought Tucker with him. Said he was part of the new life he was building. Those two were inseparable. My boy used to say Tucker was the only thing that let him sleep at night. He paused, his throat tightening. When the accident happened on a foggy mountain road, they told me the truck lost control. There were no survivors. But 2 days later, Tucker came home. His fur was matted with mud, and dried blood was on his coat. And his eyes? They looked at me like they were trying to say, he's not coming back. Linda's heart twisted. She looked at Tucker, lying still now, his chest rising and falling quickly, each breath sounding like it carried the weight of every word the old man had just spoken. I couldn't handle it, the man continued, voice low, almost afraid of hearing it himself. I shut the door to my son's room. I pushed Tucker away. I couldn't look at him without seeing my boy. I tried. God, I tried. But every time he came near, I couldn't breathe. I know I was wrong. I knew it then. But I didn't have the strength to fix it. And one day he left. The door wasn't locked. I didn't call him back. I let him go. The old man collapsed onto the cold ground, arms wrapped around Tucker's head. His whole body trembled like it had waited years for permission to finally fall apart. Tucker didn't move. He stayed there, head in the man's lap, eyes still open, not wary, not withdrawn, just present. Between them, a pain too old for words, but never far from the heart. Linda knelt beside them. She unclipped the leash from Tucker's collar and placed it in the man's hand. If you want him back, she said gently, I'll leave him with you. He belongs to your family. The old man looked down at the leash, fingertips brushing the fabric. But then he shook his head and lifted his tear-filled eyes to Linda. Not pleading, not rejecting, just full of understanding and gratitude. No, he said, voice cracking like old wood in the wind. He's yours now. I saw it in the way he walked beside you. He's not a lost dog anymore. He's found someone to believe in again, and that someone isn't me. Linda didn't answer. She didn't know how. Because the man in front of her had just handed her not only a life, but a whole chapter of love and loss that she hadn't lived, but now carried with her. Tucker, the old man whispered, gently patting the dog's head. He was the last light in my life, and now he gets to be someone else's first. That's enough. Tucker slowly lifted his head, as if to say goodbye one last time, then turned toward Linda. His eyes were softer now, no longer filled with ache or uncertainty. Linda picked up the leash again, then stood, her heart still heavy but clearer than it had ever been. She knew they hadn't come to stay. They had come to close a door, and now it was time to keep walking, carrying with them all that had been forgiven, even if no one ever asked for forgiveness aloud. The sun was beginning to set when Linda and Reggie turned onto the leaf-covered road that led to the quiet wooden house nestled beside the row of maple trees at the end of the street. The drive back from the farm felt longer than usual, not because of the distance, but because of what she carried now. A tangle of emotions both heavy and light, like the weight of a foggy chapter finally closed and the delicate anticipation of a new one, yet to be named. She didn't know what Reggie was thinking, if he was thinking at all, but the way he lay still for the entire drive, head resting gently against the window, his eyes no longer burdened with the sorrow they once held, gave her the quiet sense that something inside him had shifted. Before stepping out of the car, Linda sat still for a moment. A breeze stirred the loose strands of hair across her forehead. She glanced at Reggie, who remained motionless, eyes half shut, breathing steady. Not alert, not in that half-sleep he used to keep as a habit, but truly at ease. She reached over and rested her hand on his head, her fingertips tracing softly from the center of his brow down to the bridge of his nose. Reggie didn't open his eyes. He let out a faint sigh, not sharp, but warm, like the exhale of someone who had finally allowed themselves to feel safe. The house was the same, old, simple, but to Linda it no longer felt like a shelter for a lonely soul. It had slowly become a home for two hearts, learning how to love again. She opened the door and stepped inside. Reggie didn't need to be called. He followed on his own, his paws slow against the wooden floor, eyes scanning the familiar corners, then heading straight to the little rug beneath the coffee table. His spot. Linda hung her coat, boiled water for tea, and did something she hadn't done since Rusty passed. She turned on the warm yellow light in the living room before night had fully fallen. The soft glow spread across the space, washing everything in the hue of honey, old photographs, picture frames, and a small drawing of a golden dog that had once been her whole world. She carried her tea to the armchair and sat down with a long exhale. Reggie, as if already tuned to this rhythm, got up from his rug, walked over, and without hesitation lay down by her feet, resting his head gently on her bare foot as if that spot was the safest place in the world. No words were needed. There was only the tick of the clock, the rustle of wind outside the porch, and a quiet that felt more like an embrace than an absence. Linda leaned down and ran her hand along Reggie's back. Beneath the coat, now growing thicker and softer, was a thin but resilient frame, the silent witness to loss, wandering, and forgiveness. She felt him shift slightly, burrowing in closer, his breath deepening, and then he fell asleep. Not the restless doze of uncertainty, a real sleep, deep, grounded, trusting. For the first time since she had brought him home, Linda felt the full weight of trust in every breath he took, a beautiful surrender, no longer guarded or wary. She didn't move. She sat with him for a long time, unwilling to disturb what had finally settled between them. Her eyes drifted toward the old collar tag still resting on the shelf, the worn piece of brass, its edges chipped, still bearing the carved words that once broke her heart. "If you're reading this, I was loved once." Linda stood up gently, walked to the shelf, and picked it up with both hands, holding it like something sacred. Under the golden lamplight, the rough letters seemed to shine again, not as a lament, but as proof. Proof of a journey that had found its way home. She smiled softly, returned to her seat, and whispered just loud enough for Reggie, or maybe just herself, to hear. "And you still are." There was no need for a response. But a moment later, Reggie stirred in his sleep, let out a soft, contented sound, and his tail gave one slow, gentle wag, as if answering her in the only way he knew. And Linda understood. They had returned, not just to the wooden house, but to themselves, to the place in the heart where love had once broken, and now, quietly, carefully, had begun to mend, stitched together by the silent, steady presence of an old dog, imperfect, scarred, but entirely worth loving again. That night, Linda finally slept. A deep, restful sleep, unlike any she'd known in months, after countless nights haunted by restlessness and mornings heavy with unshed grief. Something within her had softened, like the last layer of ice at the bottom of her heart had finally cracked under the quiet warmth of a creature once abandoned by the world, who had chosen, somehow, to keep living, to love again. Early in the morning, the air carried the first chill of approaching December, slipping through the gap in the window not yet fully closed. Sunlight crept shyly across the wooden floor, catching dust motes as they floated like feathers in the stillness. Linda opened her eyes, blinking slowly awake, then reached out of habit, and felt something different. A warm, steady weight pressed gently against her leg. "Reggie." He was curled up beside the bed, nestled against her feet like a living pillow, head resting on his front paws. His eyes remained closed, but his ears were alert, not with fear, but with the quiet attentiveness of a being who had lived too long in silence and now only slept deeply when he heard the steady breath of someone he trusted. Linda didn't move. She only smiled, softly, deeply, as though some tight knot inside her had finally begun to loosen. After a while, she quietly slipped out of bed, pulling on a thick turtleneck sweater before heading into the living room, where the early light was beginning to spill through the thin curtains. She turned on the stove, prepared a pot of herbal tea, and heard the soft click of paws on the floor as Reggie wandered in behind her, stretching with a long yawn before sitting near the window. Morning light turned his gray-brown coat into a shade of warm honey. Linda was just about to reach out and pet him when she heard it. A sound so small and unfamiliar she almost thought she imagined it. A bark, soft and hesitant, barely more than a breath rising from his throat. Reggie was staring out the window at a flock of sparrows that had just landed on the windowsill, chirping in chaotic harmony like a morning symphony. Linda froze. She turned, eyes wide in disbelief, staring at Reggie like she'd just witnessed a miracle. "You just barked," she whispered, as if speaking too loudly might shatter the moment. Reggie tilted his head, not timid, not indifferent, but as if he, too, was wondering. Was that my voice? Then, after a second's pause, he barked again. Clearer this time, fuller, deeper, like someone who had just found the key to a door rusted shut for years. Linda laughed, hands flying to her mouth, eyes brimming with tears she didn't even notice. She sank beside him, running her hand along his back the way one comforts a child who has just spoken their first word. "Oh, Reggie, you do have a voice," she whispered, overcome. "How long have you been holding it in?" She lowered her head, voice soft and steady, speaking straight to her own heart. "It's okay. However long it takes. I'll wait." Reggie didn't answer in words, but he leaned in closer, resting his head gently on her lap. His tail gave a slow, steady wag, like a quiet punctuation at the beginning of a new melody. His eyes, once fogged and distant, now held a tender spark, the light of a soul reclaiming its voice after years of silence. Outside, the sparrows chirped, and the wind rustled the trees. But inside that little wooden house, something profound had just happened. Not loud, not dramatic, but enough to shift the entire sky within Linda. Reggie had barked. He had chosen to speak. He had found safety enough to let himself be heard again. And for Linda, it wasn't just a bark. It was a declaration. A quiet vow that their healing journey, hers and Reggie's, had truly, finally begun. Since that first bark, Reggie had been like a new sprout breaking through soil once scorched by loss. Each day, Linda saw him change, not loudly, not dramatically, but in quiet, steady ways. He walked faster on their way to the park, held his head higher when he heard birds, and sometimes, when he looked at her, Linda swore he was trying to smile, in his own quiet, canine way. No longer the dog who curled up at the edge of the rug, keeping his distance from everything. Now, Reggie lay by the window, fully stretched under the morning sun, occasionally nodding off to the sound of Linda reading aloud. One afternoon, while the two of them sat on the porch, Linda gently stroked his thickening coat and thought back to the first time she saw him make a child laugh, just by licking up a fallen ice cream cone beside a crying little girl. That was the first time Linda felt it clearly. Reggie had something special. Not simple cuteness, but a calming presence. He made people let their guard down without a word. He was the kind of presence that didn't demand trust but created it. That thought stayed with her for days. She started researching and eventually submitted an application for Reggie to join a local community therapy dog program at a nearby behavioral health center. The process wasn't easy. There were requirements, assessments on how he responded to loud noises, strangers, patients, and children, and whether he could remain calm in overstimulating environments. Still, Linda sent it in. Not because she thought he'd pass easily, but because she believed if any dog deserved a chance to try, it was him. The test came on a gray Saturday morning, with misty rain hanging like silk between rows of fences. Linda prepared everything: a towel, drinking water, and a few toys for comfort. When she opened the car door, Reggie jumped down on his own, tail wagging lightly. Not tentatively, but with quiet resolve. In his posture, Linda saw something grounded, not trained, but natural, as if he knew today mattered. The training center was a low-roofed building with a cozy feel, a backyard of soft grass and maple trees just beginning to flame red. In the waiting room were a few other dogs, a senior golden retriever, a chocolate lab, and a small poodle in a raincoat, shivering at his handler's feet. The humans all looked tense, but Linda simply sat, placing a hand gently on Reggie's back, as if to say, "We don't need to be like anyone else. We just need to be who we are." When their turn came, Reggie was led into a large room where the trainers had set up mock scenarios. A man coughing harshly in a corner, a boy pretending to cry, a hospital cart wheeling loudly across the floor, and speakers playing sudden bangs and door slams. Reggie stepped in. He paused, just briefly, then continued forward. No barking, no shrinking. When the man coughed loudly, Reggie turned, walked over, and sat calmly at his feet. When the boy cried, Reggie approached, lay down beside him, not too close, just near enough, his eyes soft, as if listening. When the metal cart rolled past with a clatter, Reggie tilted his head slightly, then looked on in silence, unshaken. At the final station, an older woman sat in a chair, pretending to be a dementia patient. She held out her arms. Reggie stepped forward, hesitated a moment, just a breath, then gently rested his head in her lap. That was all. But one of the trainers watching from behind wiped away tears. At the end of the evaluation, the program director, a petite woman with graying hair, walked up to Linda and smiled. "Reggie's not the most well-trained dog here," she said gently, "but he carries something you can't teach, a heart that's been broken, and has learned how to love again." Then she bent down and tied a soft, pale blue scarf around Reggie's neck. In white embroidery, it read, "Therapy Dog in Training." Linda looked at him. No longer the lost soul from Kennel 19. He was something else now, a spirit that had found its place, a being ready to give back what had once been taken from him. "You've come so far," Linda whispered, burying her face in the fur behind his ear. "And we still have a long road ahead." After the assessment at the training center, Reggie was officially recognized as a therapy dog in training. Invitations soon began to appear in Linda's inbox, like puzzle pieces quietly falling into place, forming a picture neither she nor Reggie had ever dared to imagine. Among them was a message from the local public library in the next neighborhood. Simple, short, and full of quiet hope. "We have a special little girl named Emily. If Reggie is willing to visit, we would be so grateful." Linda read the line again and again. The girl's name echoed gently in her mind, like a soft call. There wasn't much information, just that Emily was 9, diagnosed with severe autism, and didn't speak to anyone except her mother. No eye contact, no physical touch. She couldn't sit still for more than 10 minutes, and hadn't said a word in the 3 months she'd attended Story Circle, a therapeutic reading program for children with special needs. She didn't resist, didn't scream, but she lived in a world of her own, far away. That morning, the sky was pale with early sunlight, the air still damp from last night's rain. Linda prepared everything carefully. Reggie's light blue scarf embroidered with Therapy Dog in Training, a water bottle, some soft treats, and the small journal she had begun keeping about Reggie's journey. She didn't know how the day would go, but she knew this much. Reggie wasn't going to heal anyone. He was going simply to be present. And sometimes, that's enough for a miracle. As they entered the library, Reggie walked beside her without need for a leash. He was silent, steady, his gaze calm as he took in the new space without fear. The reading room was arranged like a tiny indoor garden. Floral rugs, low bookshelves, soft beanbags, warm yellow lighting, and white curtains fluttering in the breeze. In one corner, Emily sat alone, back pressed against a cushion, clutching a book that hadn't been opened. Her eyes were fixed on a small scratch on the wall, as if the world existed only there. Her mother sat several feet away, a tiny woman with sunken, tired eyes and hands clenched tightly in her lap, like she was praying for something she didn't dare say out loud. Linda stopped 3 steps from Emily. She unclipped the leash, knelt, and whispered to Reggie, "It's up to you." Then she stepped back. No commands, no cues. She trusted that Reggie would understand, in the way only those with broken hearts seem to understand one another. Reggie didn't rush. He paced a small circle around the room, nose brushing lightly across the floor, like he was reading the invisible trail of emotions left behind. Then he stopped. He didn't approach Emily. He didn't try to draw her in. He simply lay down, at a distance far enough not to threaten, but close enough to say, "I'm here if you need me." His head rested gently on his front paws, eyes calmly focused on the girl, ears tilted forward, waiting, but not expecting. 10 minutes passed. No one spoke. Linda didn't move. Emily's mother barely breathed. The librarian had quietly stepped back. Only Reggie and the girl remained. 2 souls who lived in silence, each holding a secret never spoken aloud. Then, like water finding a crack in dry earth, Emily shifted. She wasn't looking at the wall anymore. Her gaze dropped slowly and settled on the dog lying near her. It wasn't a sharp look or a focused one, but it wasn't empty. She sat a little straighter. Her grip on the book loosened. A small lollipop, forgotten in her coat pocket, rolled out and landed near Reggie's paw. He lifted his head, glanced at it, then looked back at her. He didn't move, didn't touch it, just waited. Emily leaned forward, picked up the candy, and looked at him again. And then it happened. So soft that it barely crossed the air. Like the warmth from a barely opened window, a whisper, fragile and full of something that had been locked away far too long. "Reggie!" Linda felt her heart miss a beat. Emily's mother burst into tears, one hand flying to her mouth as if afraid to break whatever magic was unfolding. The girl didn't look at her, didn't make eye contact with anyone. But the name, the voice, was a doorway. The first one into a world everyone thought had been shut forever. Ever since the morning Emily whispered Reggie's name, like the first seedling sprouting in a garden once smothered in shadow, Linda knew she could no longer keep Reggie's story to herself. What had happened wasn't meant to live only in her heart, or in the quiet memories of those who happened to witness it. It needed to be remembered. It needed to be shared. It needed to touch more hearts. So she began building something small inside her own home, a space where every trace of Reggie's quiet magic could be gently, lovingly preserved. At first, it was just an empty wall beside the large window that looked out to the back garden, where the afternoon light stretched lazily across the floor, and Reggie often napped with one leg crossed over the other, as if pondering the world. Linda cleaned the dust and hung the first photo, a Polaroid from the library, where Reggie lay beside Emily, while the little girl whispered something only he could understand. Then she added more, a crayon drawing from a boy named Caleb, showing Reggie as a superhero wearing a cape and holding a giant book. A handwritten letter in blocky script from an elderly veteran at the community center, ending with, "He didn't ask anything, but I felt heard." A scrap of green paper from a woman who had lost someone, bearing only a quiet line. "Today my house didn't feel so silent. Thank you, Reggie." Linda called it the Reggie Wall, not a memorial, not a showcase, a living wall, a place where every small moment hung not to preserve the past, but to remind her that even the smallest gestures, a glance, a head rested gently on a foot, a silent presence, could plant seeds of healing in ways no one could explain. Beneath the wall, She placed a small oak table and set on it a chestnut-colored leather-bound journal, hand-stitched at the spine. On the first page, she had written just one simple line. Reggie's journal. The things he never said, but everyone understood. From that day forward, each evening after a therapy visit, or even just a quiet walk that happened to touch a stranger, Linda would sit, open the journal, and write down what had passed. Not a diary, exactly, but small, thoughtful notes. Like the day Reggie lay beside a grieving young woman who later wrote, "I cried, and for once I wasn't afraid." Or the morning Reggie calmly watched a boy on the verge of a meltdown and somehow helped him steady just by not leaving. Some pages had ribbons tucked in, smudges from children's cookies, or a faded paw print left when Reggie accidentally stepped in paint during an art therapy session. Linda never edited a thing. Every stain, every misspelled word, and every crooked sentence was a living piece of the quiet miracles Reggie had become part of. Day by day, Reggie Wall grew. The once silent house, empty of paw steps and warmth, now carried a life of its own. Not loud, not busy, but alive, with the quiet rhythm of broken pieces slowly finding their way back together. Through every letter, every drawing, every note, every glance from Reggie, every step once heavy that now felt light again. And Linda found herself quietly changing too. She was no longer the woman who had feared loving another dog after losing Rusty. Not the woman who had once stepped into the shelter only to turn back, unable to face the pain she'd buried. Now, she was the one recording the small miracles, the kind that could only grow from a soul once abandoned, now gently, patiently loved back to life. One day a friend visited and stood before the Reggie Wall for a long time. Then, turning to Linda, asked, "You put all these up because he helped so many people?" Linda smiled and replied softly, "Not just for that. I put them up to remind myself that sometimes the one the world turns away is the only one quiet enough to hear what your heart hasn't dared to say." Since the creation of the Reggie Wall and the completion of the first journal filled with healing stories, Linda felt that the house was no longer just a temporary shelter for a once abandoned soul. It had truly become a home, not only for her and Reggie, but also for all the hearts that had quietly visited to be heard without judgment. She no longer counted the days. Each one held value as long as Reggie lay beneath the window frame, head resting on her leg. Their visits continued regularly. Though Reggie was no longer young, the steadfastness in his eyes and the gentle nod each time Linda picked up the leash conveyed his readiness. And so they went. To libraries, schools, veterans centers, and notably Maple Pines, a nursing home where people needed not just medicine, but someone to sit beside them, without questions or consolations, simply to be there. That afternoon, the weather turned suddenly cold, with winds sweeping through the leafless trees lining the path to Maple Pines. Linda wrapped an extra coat around Reggie, the frayed green scarf still neatly tied under his neck. In the car, he let out a soft yawn, then turned to look at Linda, tail gently wagging as usual. Yet something seemed slightly different, a hint of slowness in his gaze, a less decisive tilt of his head. Linda noticed but said nothing, trusting her intuition that Reggie still wanted to go. The nursing home's doors opened to a long hallway illuminated by soft yellow lights, carrying the scent of mint mixed with old paper. A few residents nodded at Reggie, calling his name as one would a familiar relative. "Dr. Reggie is here," someone teased. Linda smiled, gently tightening the leash in her hand, feeling the usual warmth. But today, Reggie was slower. He took a few steps, paused, then continued, his legs seeming stiffer than usual. As they approached the activity room, where Mr. George often sat by the window with a cup of tea and a stack of old letters, Reggie suddenly stopped, and then he collapsed. Without a bark or warning, one moment he was standing, the next his hind legs gave way, chest hitting the carpeted hallway floor, legs trembling slightly. Linda rushed over, her heart seemingly stopping. "Reggie!" she called softly but with panic, hands shaking as she cradled him, trying to lift his head. His light brown eyes were half closed, breathing labored. He wasn't unconscious, but his gaze seemed to struggle to stay in this world. The hallway fell silent, only Linda's whispering, choked with emotion. "You're okay, Reggie. I'm here, please." An elderly nurse quickly arrived, immediately calling a mobile veterinarian in the area. Linda couldn't recall the journey to the clinic clearly, only remembering clutching the leash as if holding on to a fading breath. She hadn't felt such fear since losing Rusty. Not the fear of losing a dog, but of losing a part of herself that had learned to be gentle, to be silent, to love again because of Reggie. At the clinic, Linda sat in the hallway, hands cold and eyes blurred by flashing images. Emily's smile, the drawing of Reggie as a superhero, Mr. George gently touching Reggie's back after weeks of silence. All like a film reel at risk of stopping forever if he didn't wake up. The door opened. The veterinarian approached, her eyes weary, but not hopeless. She sat beside Linda, her voice hoarse, yet gentle. "Reggie isn't young anymore, Linda. His heart is weak, joints worn, and his body has expended much energy after months of accompanying everyone. But," she paused, then smiled softly, "he hasn't given up. He's still here. And I believe Reggie wants to continue just a bit slower." Linda bowed her head into her hands, tears falling silently. She didn't sob. She knew Reggie wouldn't want that. She simply nodded, grasped the veterinarian's hand, and said, as if promising herself, "Then I'll slow down with him. Not a step without each other." In the room, Reggie was sleeping. Not unconscious, not struggling, just a deep sleep after a long journey. Linda entered, sat on the floor beside the thin blanket covering him. She placed her hand on his back, feeling each remaining breath. "It's okay," she whispered. "You've brought light to so many, now it's my turn to light a candle for you." And so, a new chapter began. No more frequent trips, no more hectic schedules. Winter was approaching. And for Reggie, this winter would be slow, warm, and peaceful, beside the person who chose not to let go, even if the whole world turned away. After days heavy with worry, Linda slowly learned how to live at a gentler pace. No more rushed mornings preparing for therapy visits, no more late nights scribbling every detail into Reggie's journal. Now it was just her, Reggie, and the quiet calm of a small home slowly gathering life back, breath by quiet breath. Reggie lay still more often, slept deeper, and breathed slower. At times it felt like everything around him was slowing down to say goodbye. But Linda didn't believe that. She saw it in his eyes. Clouded now with age, yes, but still holding light. Not the kind that flares up like fire, but the steady warmth of glowing coals. It was enough to tell her. The journey wasn't over yet. In the days following Reggie's collapse at Maple Pines, Linda barely stepped outside. She moved his old bed closer to the window, where the morning sun was warmest and the evening breeze didn't reach. She boiled marrow broth with vegetables, chopped everything finely, and mixed it with soft rice and egg yolk so Reggie could eat more easily. Every time he finished a full meal, Linda smiled like someone who had just made it through a storm. And every time he stood up on his own to drink water, she stayed seated afterward for a long while, heart quietly aglow. Then, one early morning, with the windows still fogged by mist, Reggie slowly braced his front legs, then his back legs, and stood, steady. Linda paused at the kitchen counter, looked over her shoulder and saw him, standing upright, quiet, eyes on her, his tail moving just slightly as if to say hello. She couldn't speak. She simply stepped forward, knelt, and wrapped her arms around him, pressing her face into the thick fur that had regained its shine after weeks of careful brushing. Her tears fell, but not out of sadness, not out of fear. They came because her heart had just been patched together one more time, thanks to the same friend who once needed her and now was ready to keep going beside her. Not out of duty, but because something in him wasn't finished yet. After drying her eyes, Linda sat by the window and opened Reggie's journal to a blank page. She wrote in neat, careful strokes, "Day 102 since our first outing. Reggie stood up this morning. Not in a hurry, not out of effort. Just an ordinary moment of standing that felt like a miracle no one dared to ask for. He still wants to do something. Not to prove anything, just because he loves." That afternoon, Linda went to the drawer where she kept the scarf embroidered with therapy dog in training. She held it in her hands for a long while, then folded it and placed it on the table. No need to tie it around Reggie's neck. Not yet. Just leaving it there was enough. A promise unspoken. And that evening, under the soft yellow glow of the lamp, Reggie rested his head on Linda's leg the way he always did. She placed a hand gently on his back and said, "This time we move at your pace. No more rushing, no titles, no medals, no expectations, just presence, besides those who need it." Reggie sighed, softly, like the wind slipping through the garden. Linda knew he understood. That winter began with a slowing of the heartbeat, not as an ending but as an invitation to listen more deeply. Their calendar grew lighter, trimmed down to only the most familiar places. The trips were fewer but richer, more tender and quieter than ever. And with every step Reggie took, he offered a quiet reminder. Even when the body begins to fade, the heart can still give, through presence, through gaze, and through the gentle breath of a beautiful life, still unfolding. After weeks of quiet healing and deep tenderness, Reggie had slowly reclaimed his rhythm of life. Not fast, not forceful, but steady enough to make one thing clear. His journey wasn't over yet. Each morning Linda would watch him as winter sunlight lit up the silver now woven into his fur, and every time Reggie stood and gave his tail a slow, gentle wag, it felt like a whisper. "I'm still here, still ready." One afternoon, while sitting beneath the Reggie wall, her eyes paused on an old photo, Rusty curled up in front of the fireplace in a winter cabin years ago. Linda smiled, a soft ache blooming in her chest. She realized she had buried something deep for too long, a memory of the last place she had felt whole before everything fell apart. So, without planning, without hesitation, she packed a few things. A worn blanket, a simple basket of food, Reggie's medication, and her nearly full Reggie's journal. That morning, she drove slowly along the winding road north, toward the mountains, where a weathered cabin nestled quietly among the pines. The first snow had just melted, leaving a thin film of damp earth along the trail, and the air carried the scent of wet soil, bringing her back to the days when she was just a girl, hugging Rusty amidst the vast, snowy highlands. The cabin was unchanged, its roof grayed by time, small windows veiled with dust, and a low, crooked fence that still stood, like the unwavering loyalty of memories that had never truly faded. Linda opened the door. The hinges creaked in that familiar way, like an old friend saying, "Welcome back." She lit the wood-burning stove, swept away the dust, and gently unrolled the old rug in the center of the room, right where Rusty used to sleep. And then, without a hint of hesitation, Reggie walked forward, turned in a slow circle, and lay down. Right there, in front of the fireplace, in the exact spot where Rusty once curled up during nights when the wind howled through the trees. Linda's breath caught. She walked over, knelt beside him, and ran her hand down his back. Reggie didn't lift his head. He simply nudged his nose into her leg, as if to say, I know this place mattered to you." Night fell slowly around the cabin. Linda stoked the fire again, made a pot of soup, and sat with Reggie by the half-open window, gazing into the quiet woods. The moonlight stretched across the wooden floor, and tree branches cast soft, inky shadows like brush strokes in a watercolor painting. When she leaned back on a thick floor cushion, Reggie rose from his place, walked to her, and gently rested his head on her lap, just as Rusty used to do, as if memories don't die, but instead transform, passing from one soul to the next, returning only when they're needed most. Linda placed her hand gently on Reggie's head, and whispered, between the soft crackle of the fire and the wind rustling through the trees. "You know, this place used to hurt, but now it feels full. Not because Rusty has returned, but because you're here, and I don't feel like I've lost anything anymore." Outside, the sky was cloudless, a blanket of stars stretched wide like velvet threaded with silver. Linda looked up, feeling held by something steady, something still. In her heart, there was no longer fear of losing someone again. Only gratitude. Gratitude for Reggie, for loving again, and for old memories that no longer stung, but made her heart beat softer, deeper. And in that still night, where two once-wounded souls leaned quietly into each other, with no promises, no need for words, just presence, Linda added one more line to her journal. "I once believed I could never return to this cabin, but Reggie has shown me that sometimes the most painful memories are doors to healing, if we are brave enough to open them." After the coldest night of winter, beneath a sky scrubbed clean by memory and heavy with stars, Linda awoke in the little wooden cabin, still curled slightly toward Reggie, as had become her habit over the past months. Pale morning light crept through the frosted window panes, casting soft gray streaks across the wooden floor. The fireplace had gone out during the night. No more crackling logs, no lingering warmth in the planks. But what made Linda shiver wasn't the chill in the air. She reached for the familiar weight of the dog who had, for so long, slept against her legs. But the blanket beside her remained still, untouched. Her heart paused. Her eyes found the corner of the room, where Reggie still lay, stretched out, his head resting gently on the welcome home pillow Linda had sewn by hand the day she brought him home. He looked peaceful, beautiful, like he had simply dozed off after a long walk in the woods. As if any second now, he might stretch, wag his tail, and give his usual raspy yawn. But he didn't. Linda rose slowly, each step sinking deeper into a layer of memory. She knelt beside him, laid a trembling hand on his chest, where once his breath rose in steady rhythm, and felt nothing. No heartbeat, no movement, only stillness, but not empty, not cold. A stillness so gentle it ached, as if Reggie had chosen this moment, this place, to say goodbye. Not with a bark, not with a gesture, just with the softest retreat. Linda didn't cry right away. She sat there, hand resting on his fur, holding on to the last threads of warmth. Outside, the wind moved through the pines, whispering like the forest exhaling. The fire had died, but Linda's heart stayed warm, not from flame, but from love. A love that had endured doubt, hurt, trust, and finally, a beautiful surrender to time. She bowed her head, pressed a kiss to Reggie's forehead, and ran her hand down his stiffened spine. Her voice, barely a whisper and fragile as dry leaves tapping a window, trembled. "You were loved, still are, and always will be." It wasn't a farewell. It was a truth. Simple, unshakable. That morning, Linda prepared everything with the tenderness of someone doing one last thing for a friend who had given her more than she'd ever dared hope for. She folded the green scarf-embroidered therapy dog in training, placed it beside the old pillow, and a photo of the two of them beneath the maple tree, all tucked into a wicker basket. No ceremony, no mournful music. Just her two hands, soft and steady, digging a resting place beneath the old maple behind the cabin, the tree where Reggie had spent hours watching leaves fall, ears tilted toward the breeze, as if listening to a melody only he could hear. She didn't rush. Each scoop of earth was deliberate. She didn't wipe her tears. She didn't sigh. When she laid Reggie down, she didn't speak a prayer. She simply gave her full presence, the kind of love that had learned not to fear loss anymore. On a small stone she had carved by hand, she etched the words, "If you're reading this, I was loved once." And just beneath that, carved deeper, firmer, "And you always will be." That afternoon, Linda sat for a long time on the wooden steps outside the cabin. The sun filtered gently through the trees. The wind moved the leaves as it always had. Reggie was no longer beside her. No quiet paw taps on the porch. No stirring at her feet. But still, he hadn't left. In her lap was Reggie's journal, nearly filled to the last page. She opened it and wrote the final line of his journey. "You came into my life by accident and left as something I could never be without. You weren't just loved, Reggie. You taught me how to love again, without fear. And for that, I'll keep going. Not in your place, but carrying forward the light you left behind." And outside, the wind whispered through the maple leaves, like the soft thump of a tail, gently wagging just beyond the branches. After days of living with a new kind of quiet, no soft brown eyes following her every move, no gentle tail wag when she walked through the door, Linda made a decision. She returned to the first place where Reggie had shown her that presence, even silent, could heal an entire small world. The town library hadn't changed. Brown-tiled roof, low-glass windows, wooden benches covered in fallen leaves, and the chalkboard sign still bearing the familiar message, "Read with a Pet, Saturdays at 10 a.m. Linda opened the door and stepped into the light-filled room, alive with children's laughter, not loud, not wild, but quiet, almost expectant. Familiar faces sat in a circle on colorful animal-shaped cushions. Caleb, Emily, Aaron, little Mia with her curly hair, and secret cookie stash. In the middle was a space, the place where Reggie used to lie, head resting on someone's leg, eyes half closed, yet always listening. The elderly librarian gave Linda a warm smile and nodded, as if to welcome her back to a role she and Reggie had once shared. Storyteller, not just for children, but for hearts that needed holding. Linda stepped into the circle, holding Reggie's journal in her arms, the leather cover soft from time, the pages puffed up from being stuffed with drawings, letters, and moments. She sat on the familiar wooden chair, took a slow breath, and opened it to the very first page. Her voice rose, gentle but steady, as though she were reading to herself as much as to the others. Day 1, Reggie didn't say anything, but I felt him listening to everything. No barking, no tricks, just being there, and somehow it was enough. The children didn't fidget. Emily hugged a fox-shaped pillow tight, eyes wide. Caleb leaned back, gazing up at the ceiling, where Reggie used to track sunbeams with his eyes, tail wagging at the sound of a giggle. Aaron pressed his lips together, nodding solemnly when Linda read, "He didn't do anything. But I've never seen someone be so fully present." When she reached page 4, the entry about the first time Reggie laid beside a child and the child cried, Linda paused. Her voice softened to a hush, as if gently brushing against a living memory. "I once wondered, how could a dog who never speaks make someone feel so safe? But Reggie didn't need words. He stayed. And sometimes, staying is the strongest promise of all." The room was so quiet that Linda could hear the wind slipping through the window frame. She closed the journal and placed it in the center of the circle. Then she looked around at each small face and spoke, her voice warm like firelight on a winter night. "Reggie isn't here anymore, but I think his heart is, in each of you who felt him listen, who felt him stay." She stood, gently flipped to the first blank page at the back of the journal, pulled a blue ink pen from her pocket, and laid it down beside the open book. "Now it's your turn. If there's anything Reggie left with you, a story, a thank you, a drawing, even just a mark, you can write it here, so he knows he never really left." Silence. Then, slowly, Caleb stood up. He knelt, gripped the pen firmly, and wrote, "Reggie taught me it's okay to slow down, and not be ashamed when I need more time." Next came Emily. Her handwriting was uneven, letters wobbling. "You were quiet, like me, but you didn't leave. I won't leave you either." Aaron wrote less, "I miss you," and drew a small wagging tail and a heart beside it. Linda was still. Each mark, each word, was like a new heartbeat in her chest. She realized Reggie's journal was no longer hers. It had become a shared record of a soul that had passed through many lives. on soft paws with steady eyes, and a silence more powerful than any speech. She picked up the journal, pressed it to her chest, and whispered, her voice trembling, "This book, it'll keep going, to the nursing home, to the shelter, to every place Reggie ever visited. Anyone who was touched by him, through presence or memory, can leave a line, not to remember, but to carry on." That day, as Linda stepped out of the library, the afternoon sun filtered through the trees, and a breeze brushed gently across her coat. She turned back and saw the children still gathered around the journal. One of them held up a new drawing, Reggie in the center of a circle of people, ears soft, eyes kind. Linda smiled. She was no longer walking alone. That morning, sunlight filtered gently through the oak trees lining the elementary schoolyard, casting a thin golden hue across the hallway. Linda stepped through the familiar green-painted iron gate, her heart both full and empty. Since Reggie's passing, she'd continued visiting the library and nursing home, carrying Reggie's journal to listen to others' memories. Yet this school, the place where Reggie would eagerly wag his tail upon arrival, was the one place she hadn't found the strength to return to. Every Tuesday and Thursday morning, Reggie would stand at the classroom door, waiting for each child to timidly enter, especially Joel, the boy who always arrived last, clutching his shirt tightly, eyes red from crying. Joel was a child whom teachers, parents, and counselors alike struggled to reach. He refused breakfast, avoided conversation, recoiled from touch, and often emitted silent screams whenever brought into the classroom, silent yet filled with pain. Only when Reggie appeared would Joel sit quietly. He wouldn't touch or look at Reggie, but the dog's mere presence in the classroom, lying down with half-closed eyes and steady breathing, seemed to calm the storm within Joel. After Reggie's departure, Linda thought of Joel often, but hadn't mustered the courage to return. Then came a call from Joel's teacher, her voice gentle, yet tinged with emotion. "Ms. Linda, Joel has been bringing a stuffed dog to class. He holds it in his lap, sitting by the window as he used to. He says its name is Reggie, and there's something he wants to tell you himself." Linda arrived during the morning's quiet reading time. The children sat immersed in their books, the soft rustling of pages echoing like whispers through a forest. As she entered, a few recognized her and murmured, their eyes lighting up at the sight of an old friend. But one gaze made her catch her breath. Joel, sitting alone in the corner, cradling a well-worn brown stuffed dog with long, floppy ears adorned with a faded blue ribbon. He held it with both hands, as if it were a living, breathing being. Linda took a small chair and sat before him. Saying nothing, Joel lifted his head to meet her gaze, no longer avoiding eye contact. In his eyes was a different kind of silence, not fear or emptiness, but a trust that had taken root after being nurtured by the quiet companionship of a dog who had sat by his side day after day. After a brief pause, Joel extended the stuffed dog toward Linda, placing it gently in her hands, and whispered so softly that she had to lean in to hear. "I named him Reggie. He helps me quiet the screaming inside." Linda bit her lip, holding back tears. She stroked the stuffed dog's head, then turned to Joel, her eyes moist but her voice steady. "I believe Reggie truly is here, Joel. He was always good at that, helping others quiet the storms within, even when the tempest raged silently." The teacher quietly approached, handing Linda a small piece of paper with Joel's handwriting. Awkward, printed letters. "I'm afraid of screaming again? But Reggie is silent, so I stay silent, too, and it feels easier to breathe." Linda held the note as if it were a delicate treasure. She realized that not all of Reggie's legacies were tangible or easily defined, but in children like Joel, his impact was profound, manifesting as quiet courage, the ability to remain present in a classroom without fleeing from oneself. That afternoon, Linda returned home, opened Reggie's journal, and pasted Joel's note beneath a line she'd once written. "Silence can also be a language." Then, in gentle cursive, She added, "Joel was once a storm. Now he's a calm lake with gentle ripples, thanks to a stuffed dog named Reggie, who knows how to sit still for a long time." Reggie didn't take away Joel's fear. He just stayed long enough for Joel to learn how to stay too. Outside, the wind rustled through the leaves, carrying the laughter of children heading home from school. Linda looked up at the sky and smiled softly. She knew that Reggie was somewhere out there, not in fur or flesh, but in every peaceful breath he'd instilled in the hearts of children who understood the power of quiet companionship. A few days after the meeting in Joel's classroom, as the spring sunlight began to cast a golden hue over the porch steps, and birdsong echoed through the budding trees, Linda returned from the library, carrying the Reggie's journal that had become a shared chronicle. On the old wooden porch lay a pale brown envelope, devoid of postal markings or a sender's name, bearing only Linda inscribed in careful, firm handwriting. She sat on the steps, opened the envelope, and found inside a handwritten letter in deep blue ink on thin gray paper. As her eyes settled on the opening lines, her heart sank slightly. The signature at the end read, "Isaac," and instantly, the image of the silver-haired man with a wooden cane and deep-set eyes from the farm years ago swept over her like a poignant breeze. The letter began slowly, each line seemingly penned amidst hesitation and deep breaths. "Dear Linda, you may not realize what you've done. Or perhaps you do, but please allow me, the son of the man who was Reggie's first owner, to express it in my own words." Linda paused her reading, her heart stirred by the gentle yet profound reminder. She continued, her hands trembling as if holding the very essence of memory. "When my father met you and Reggie, he returned home and recounted the encounter, not through words, but through his eyes, the eyes of a man who had lost what mattered most, now unexpectedly restored. You not only brought Tucker, or Reggie as you call him, back, but also revived a part of his son's memory, a son we thought had vanished without a trace. But what makes you truly remarkable isn't just finding Reggie, it's that you chose to love him again, with a heart that had once been broken." The next lines were slower, as if the writer hesitated and then choked up. "You gave Reggie a new chapter, not to replace the old but to extend it, to show that a being once loved, if fortunate, can be loved again. And through you, we, who had erred, who had let go out of weakness, are silently forgiven." Linda placed a hand over her chest, as if holding her heart together to prevent it from shattering into indescribable emotions. She read on to the letter's end, where reason gave way to the purest gratitude. "Thank you for allowing Reggie to be loved once more. Thank you for helping people like you, and like us, believe that kindness endures. Not in grand gestures, not in world-shaking deeds, simply in the kindness of someone deciding to stay when the world has turned away." At the letter's close, Isaac included an old address and a note. "If you ever return to where you first found Reggie, my father would be delighted to sit with you without the need for words. Just to know that the good that happened is real." Linda folded the letter, pressing it gently between her hands as if holding a delicate gift. Tears fell silently, flowing as quiet tributes to a dog who had lived and loved long enough to bridge distant hearts, deeply enough to leave echoes in those who had never even touched him. That evening, Linda opened Reggie's journal, turning to the near final pages, where she had written about Joel, Emily, Mr. Hal, the library, the nursing home, and now she added another line. "Today, I received a letter not written to me, but to the heart that once loved Reggie. Perhaps true kindness is a flame, held by one, then quietly passed on." Outside, night fell softly. On the table, a dim candle cast shadows over the old, tarnished tag, engraved with, "If you're reading this, I was loved once." Linda gently touched the worn surface, whispering as if he were still near. And now, so many more know it too. After folding Isaac's letter, the one from the son of Reggie's original owner, Linda sat quietly on the porch for a long time, eyes resting on the backyard where Reggie had always paused at the end of each day. The air was brisk, but the sunlight carried the early warmth of spring. A soft wind stirred the budding maple leaves overhead, and in that moment Linda understood. Reggie's journey might have ended in the physical world, but it had never ended in the hearts of those he touched. The next morning, Linda rose earlier than usual. She brought out a small oak sign she had been sanding and carving by hand over the past week. On the board, the words stood out clear and strong, yet gentle. Reggie's rest stop. Pause, breathe, and love. She hung the sign beneath the porch awning, right above the step where Reggie used to lie every afternoon, his head resting against the wood, eyes half closed, as if watching and remembering every quiet detail for someone. For a child learning how to read, for an old man learning how to smile again, or for a woman like Linda, who once believed she'd never be able to love anything again. Beneath the sign, Linda placed a small wicker basket filled with clean towels and a bowl of fresh water for passing pets, a tray of homemade dog treats, and a small tin box with paper and pens, for anyone who wished to leave a note. For Reggie, for themselves, for someone in need of a moment of softness on a long day. Then she stepped back inside, passing the sunlit window where Reggie used to sit each morning. She took a seat in the same old wooden chair, opened a brand new journal with a deep navy cover, fresh, waiting and ready, and let the morning light stretch across the page like a gentle veil of memory. She put pen to paper and wrote, "Reggie didn't just change lives, he connected them." At that very moment, as if in quiet agreement, a breeze swept across the porch, and the old tarnished tag hanging by the window let out a soft clink. That small sound, barely more than a whisper, was enough to remind Linda she wasn't alone. The tag, still engraved with the words, "If you're reading this, I was loved once," now caught the light in a way that made it gleam. Not with nostalgia, but with presence. With every place Reggie had quietly walked, school hallways, library corners, nursing homes, living rooms, the love he gave had spread, quietly, permanently. Linda stood and placed her hand gently on the tag, like she was touching Reggie's heartbeat again. She spoke, not to be heard, just to be felt. "You still are, and always will be." Outside, a young boy passed by with a small dog in tow. He stopped when he noticed the sign, "Reggie's Rest Stop," read it aloud, and smiled. He paused for a moment, gently wiped his dog's paws with one of the towels, and took out a scrap of paper from his pocket. He scribbled something quickly, folded it, and dropped it into the tin box beneath the porch. Linda watched from the window. She didn't call out. She just smiled, softly. When the boy had gone, she stepped out onto the porch, opened the tin box, and unfolded the note. "My dog's scared of thunder, but today, she sat still when I hugged her and read the sign. Thank you, Reggie." Linda pressed the note into the new journal, right on the first page. And she knew more pages would come. Written not only by her, but by hearts that understood what it meant to pause, to breathe, and to love again. And so, Reggie, the old dog once left behind in Kennel 19, once silent for too long, once thought to have nothing left to give, had become something eternal. Not with barks, not with running feet, but with his quiet presence and the love he never stopped giving. Reggie may have left this world, but his journey continues. In every healed heart, in every quiet gaze that dares to stay a little longer, and in every journal page still waiting to be filled. This isn't just the story of a forgotten dog. It's a reminder that a gentle presence can transform a life just by choosing to stay. And what about you? Have you ever met your own Reggie? Someone who, without saying much, made you feel truly seen? Share your story in the comments. Someone out there may need to hear it. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so the kindness Reggie left behind can keep rippling outward. Thank you for staying until the very end, just like Reggie always did.